Hello, everybody, and welcome to Macstaff Live. My name's Martin Crowson, and you join us today to discuss how to build a winning brand. We're here together, as always, with the MD of Macstaff, Anthony McCormack. Hello, Ant, how are you?
Hi, Mark. Good, thanks. Yourself?
Yeah, good, thank you. And we're also here with a very special guest today, who I'm going to hand over to Ant to introduce.
Yeah, let's do it that way. And I suppose just quickly before I do, we will be talking largely due to our special guest, James, from ThinkInCircles, about building a good brand in recruitment. But this chat should be of equal value to HR and TA representatives that are thinking about, brand issues for their organizations, and indeed like recruiters like myself who are advising clients on the same. But yeah, we've got thanks very much, James Whitelock from MD from ThinkInCircles. I guess that's the day job, isn't it? But he's also strategic advisor with Candidate Hub that I was interested in because it's tied to Canada, and chairs also the recruitment marketing forum with AppsCo. So who knew? But to me, he's more like friend from team. Previous sponsor of the cocktail bar at Team Conference, and I thought anybody who's kind of bought me a mojito, it's definitely friend for life. So welcome.
Thank you very much. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. Yeah, I remember that evening well, which most people didn't, because I bought drinks for about 300 people.
I know, I remember the first hour.
James, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for that. It's a pleasure to be here.
Let's crack on. How important is a good company brand, and what do you actually see that as? Let's start with you, Ant, first.
So it's that like unquantifiable thing, isn't it? Actually, that kind of overarches like a company's kind of products and services and things like that. It's so it's difficult to define, but so I'd be thinking that it's stuff like the emotional, connection that people have with a company, the perception, and it's the thing that I guess allows a company to leverage into other like products and services or verticals, like because M&S is a really trusted brand. They were able to go into financial services and things like that. And there is a connection, which we'll come on to, with employer brand, but I would argue that they do exist distinctly, and your brand can positively or negatively affect your employer brand and therefore your ability to recruit. So yeah, it's a hot topic at the moment.
James, over to you. And just at this point, do you think branding also, James, has got a lot more important over the last decade in a more competitive market, or not?
I think it's always been important, right? You've always every person who starts their own business, and no matter how large that business gets or how small that business stays, wants a brand that is trusted, right? That is what you want, because it is that, and that's what it comes down to. It's a brand that you trust. And a brand that builds advocates, people who are fans, basically. So you look at the kind of the biggest brands that people will always flock to. So whenever there's something new coming out from Apple, there are those fanboys who always want that kind of thing from Apple. And any brand, any business, no matter which industry they're in, they want to be in that position where they've got advocates, people who are going to kind of do the branding and do the marketing almost on their behalf, because they're going to send in referrals and say, don't use these guys, use these guys instead, because I've had a great experience with them over there for whatever that service, whatever that product is. That's the kind of place you want to get to. And you can go back in through history, since there's been kind of companies, there's always been people that you associate with kind of brands from things that have stuck, like Hoover, for instance, where actually we call a vacuum cleaner a Hoover still, because that have built a trusted brand. So you can go all the way back, to kind of these kinds of these brands and these businesses and these companies that are still with us today, but have kind of defined their space, and people have kind of got this kind of affinity with them, and whether it's kind of an emotional kind of affinity, whether it's this kind of trust, whether it's whatever it is, that's where you want to kind of get to.
I think it's quite interesting as well, isn't it, when we start thinking about brands, for people that don't think about branding all the time, the actual things that make you want to buy that product, and you sort of unconsciously take in the things that make you relate to that product. Why do we want a Coca-Cola at a certain time, or why do we go to John Lewis, and those things? Only when you start thinking about that, you realize how important that is. And
yeah, I read quite a lot of kind of books that are linked to kind of psychology and things like that around business, and it's exactly that. The brand shortcuts the requirement to make a logical decision about what you're going to buy or what you're going to do each time. You just know that you're an Apple guy. You're not about to buy buy a PC, are you? If you've got your iPhone and your iPad and all the other things. I'm more of an Android guy myself, but controversial. But yeah,
that's interesting itself, isn't it? Because I'm an Apple guy, and my kids as well. They'll give me some stick for that. But you have got such loyalty to that brand that you're like, no way would ever go to an Android. And I guess, James, that's the sort of
but it doesn't have
quality branding we're talking about.
It doesn't have to be Apple, or it doesn't have to be any of those things. It can be a very small business, and running your business, you'll have people that you'll have clients that you speak to on a daily basis who only use you and only probably ever use you. And when you kind of and when you kind of grow, when you get larger recruit business, exactly the same kind of way, and the brand is so affected by different kind of touch points, whether it is the people within that business, whether it's the quality of that product, whether it's the cost of that product. All these things kind of like combine together to make someone an advocate for that. And on the flip side, you break one of those kind of chains, suddenly you can kind of lose all of that kind of good work that you've built up over years and years, and it can be destroyed very quickly. It's why larger businesses spend absolutely millions on trying to kind of hone what their brand stands for, and what people kind of how they perceive their brand. That's what that's about. You don't have to spend millions, right? Because you just work within your own kind of target audiences. If you're a smaller business, your target audience is a lot smaller than the likes of Apple or Coke or someone like that. But again, it's about building that affinity and trying your hardest and damnedest to not break that kind of affinity with all the different touch points that a client might have with your brand.
Sure. Let's move on to employer branding, because they can work together, but there is a difference, isn't there, between the two, between branding and employer branding? Just explain a bit about it.
Yeah, and I've been kind of realizing and thinking that through more and more. The big companies that are juggernaut brands and things like that, as James says, know this very well anyway, and they kind of spend a lot of money to kind of hone and promote their kind of brand image. But with the employer brand exists separately, I suppose. Traditionally, and I think it might have been closer before, like people started their career, they wanted to join like a good company, like a reputable company, so everybody wanted to work for Lloyd's Bank or M&S and things like that. But now it's more nuanced, like it's not a one size fits all, like everybody wants their kind of personal match, and that's why companies, whilst they compete over quantifiable things to do with their employer brand, like salary and benefits, and lots of talk on flexible and hybrid working and things like that, but it's also the unquantifiable things as well, like their company culture, like values, ethos, like purpose comes up a lot. So whilst a few years ago maybe I'd have said good brand like that always attract all the best people, like Google or Facebook and things like that, there's a bit of a backlash against those tech giants, isn't there? And they do a few things wrong in terms of the kind of the management or the ethics, and it's a turn off. And probably a better example these days is I'm reading this book, I've finished it recently, from Mark Benioff. So he's the entrepreneur behind Salesforce. So I mean, they do sell software as a service, but they're known more as, and I'm reading off this, their business being a great platform for change. Like they're changing the world through, the work that they do and all the money that they give to charity and the support of the projects and the volunteering and things like that. And that can create a very, that can like be the glue that attracts and holds employees together with the business, because they're on the same mission. Like they feel like it's a tribe more than a employee employer-employee type relationship. That helps anyway. So yes, they're related but separate.
Yeah. James, what's your experience of employer branding in your line of work?
Well, I think kind of Anthony is right in a roundabout kind of way, that they kind of, that one can affect the other. Well, one can affect in one direction. So the perception of your brand can definitely affect your employer brand. Probably not the other way, right? So if you've got a bad employer brand, probably won't affect your brand too much, but it does go kind of in the other direction. I think also these days it's job seekers can be a bit more kind of be pretty selfish, and they'll kind of go where they think the kind of best opportunity are, and that might be the kind of why they choose a certain business over. But that is something you can definitely kind of play into within your employer brand. So, for instance, you might go to work at somewhere because you know that they're known for doing something very well within that business, and that might be a reason and something you might kind of play on to get there. The overall brand might not be the best in the, I still kind of would argue that, though people are falling out of love with the kind of the likes of these kind of bigger tech businesses, having Facebook on your CV isn't going to do you any harm, right? And it does, and getting in there, I know some of how much some of those people earn. You're minted pretty well at that point as well. So I mean, there's still these kind of other drivers, I think, kind of that can affect your kind of employer brand that makes it slightly different from the overall kind of brand. But definitely, if you've got a bad brand generally, if you've had, if you're in the news for, stealing people's data, not mentioning any brands that I may have just already mentioned, right? That can definitely have an effect on your employer brand, but not completely, right? Because you're still a big player in that space. So people will still kind of want to work with you. So there is this slight kind of dichotomy between the two of them kind of pushing and pulling against each other. Also, the other thing that is kind of very kind of relevant and now within the employer branding space isn't just kind of like the overall company employer brand. What you sometimes now get sold is your kind of like team employer brand. So you're going to work for this department, this team within this business, and they have this they have these benefits, they have this culture, this is how they work, as opposed to generally, so you can get quite granular now. And a lot of the bigger businesses have that kind of big, small company ethos, the likes of kind of IBM, you go to work for this bit of IBM, and that's the kind of how they work and their ethos and their kind of values, as opposed to these guys are everybody similar, but not exactly the same. And so you kind of get sold this very kind of almost kind of slightly more sort of kind of a disparate kind of version of employer branding at kind of a team branding level.
And that's something you've noticed recently, is it, James?
Yeah, I mean, we see that a lot, kind of more and more. So, again, you've got to be a very big business, right, to be able to culture and cultivate that, right? But I mean, you start to see it in certain kind of companies that are those 50, 100 man kind of businesses, that these guys over here are kind of doing. They've got their own thing going on because this is because of what they do. You employ them because they've got a slightly different kind of cultural fit to these guys over here. I think it's always been that, right? Yeah, I mean, and it's not just based on what they actually do. It's the kind of energy you want to put in to that part of the business as opposed to the energy you want to put into that part of the business. I see that a lot now.
Yeah, sure. And if we're talking a little bit more granular detail, let's move seamlessly onto EVP, or employee value proposition, as a part of the offering. I found a description of that, of EVP is the balance of the rewards and benefits that are received by employees in return for their performance at the workplace. And explain that in a little bit more detail, and what sort of things can provide that EVP.
Yeah. So, and a lot of companies, again, it's an important subject. They're spending a lot of time and money working out what their employer brand is, but further than that, what their employee value proposition is. And sometimes there can be a disconnect as well. So what they think it is isn't what it is, sort of thing. And I guess we're going to come on to like candidate experience, because then they can have a clearly defined even employee value proposition, and then find out that that's not really communicated out in the way that the interaction, like from a prospect or employee or employee experiences. But yeah, again, quantifiable and unquantifiable things. So the transaction, and I'll just read from a corporate client that I'm working with at the moment. It can get a bit samey, so it's not necessarily a differentiator. 25 days annual leave, 7.5% pension scheme, bonus, healthcare, and then other kind of bits and bobs like cycle to work scheme, gym memberships, and discounts like from retailers and things like that. And every good large kind of known brand company is going to have something really similar to that. The other kind of parts are the unquantifiable things on the employer value proposition, and that's again things like culture, that's the flexible working, that's the purpose, the why, I suppose, and that's the Simon Sinek book, isn't it? Like start with why, as to what the purpose of your company is, so that people can engage and believe and go in the same direction. So I think employee EVP is a lot about those kind of aspects, and it should be carefully kind of researched and communicated. Like, a lot of companies make assumptions as to what the best bit of their EVP is and shout about those things, but actually, it's the comfy sofas and the kind of the free ice cream and things like that people actually kind of connect with. So it's about kind of getting on the same page, and I suppose it's as much about assessing what the DNA of the company is, like, as much as it is so recognizing what the EVP is, as well as rather than creating it, because otherwise it becomes like a an irrelevant thing, or doesn't speak to the day-to-day work experience, doesn't it? Like your kind of vision statement that's kind of building up dust in reception, sort of thing.
I like that idea, Ant, of the company thinking it's offering a certain EVP, but the people who are actually receiving it aren't agreeing with what that is. That's quite interesting. James, do you agree? Have you seen things similar to what Ant's just mentioned in your work? And have you maybe seen anything that's a bit off the wall in terms of an EVP offering that you think, oh, wow,
So yeah, I mean, EVPs, again, it's one of those difficult things to kind of to craft within your business, because you either kind of lead or you get led, right? And I think that's one of the kind of situations that Anthony's talking about, is that the EVP that you think you might have, actually possibly you've created, but it wasn't meant to have created in the first place. So it's just kind of created this kind of culture within your business. And then trying to kind of then retrofit on something into that can be really, really kind of difficult. The way I always kind of put, EVP basically is why should I work at this business, right? That's EVP, right? That's the kind of fundamental question you're asking. And it's different from kind of, employer brand is your reputation, whereas EVP is the narrative, right? That's the kind of that's how we was kind of think about it. And yeah, it's easy to talk around, like Anne said, it can but potentially collect dust. But actually getting people on board is actually really, really quite difficult, because you could be then forcing something upon them, a culture, especially if they're already working for you. This doesn't really necessarily affect the people who you're trying to attract. You're forcing something upon them that they didn't actually join for. They joined because you probably didn't have an EVP at that point. You didn't really understand it, but actually you'd already crafted something that was just appeal to these kinds of people. Maybe they weren't the right people, but we can kind of talk around that kind of, and about that a bit better. But there are lots of businesses that kind of do it well. I think there is a lot of there's a lot of kind of focus at the minute with EVP on diversity and inclusion and equity within your kind of business. I think those are kind of some of the bigger key terms at the minute. Businesses that are kind of doing it kind of well, the likes of kind of Electronic Arts, EA, do it kind of really well. If you go look at kind of what they kind of put out there, every recruiter's favorite, Innocent Drinks. They kind of, I know they've kind of their brand has been hit a little bit over the kind of last few years, but generally they're kind of they've got a fairly good kind of EVP out there with that thing. And they do kind of focus a lot on kind of the breadth of the people within their business, which is again quite, unless you've got the breadth of people in your business when you're kind of talking about this kind of equity and diversity and accessibility, it's hard to show that actually to the outside world. You haven't actually got that there in the first place. But those are kind of themes that seem to be kind of really kind of good, that seem to be kind of hitting home at the moment. Yeah.
I think companies can offer whatever they like and think they're doing a good enough job in certain areas, but it's all down to a candidate walking away from there and thinking, how did that go for me and what do I see of them? And that candidate experience is hugely important, isn't it, Ant? And, especially in your line of work.
Yeah, I was just thinking that because, again, a company can feel all self-satisfied that we've got the brand, the employer brand, the EVP, like it's all on the same page. And then if that's not actually what the day-to-day experience is for an employee or for a prospect candidate, then it's all for naught in a way. And I not increasingly, but I do get feedback from candidates each time they go for an interview, and often there's disappointment that their candidate experience within the recruitment process doesn't reflect their perception of the employer brand, and that can be system things of common complaints. Just basically the whole recruitment process takes too long. There's too many stages. There's too much testing, which I don't like, or I don't like the fact that it was like such a big panel interview. The experience is negative. It feels like kind of having to prove that you're good enough, rather than it being a nice two-way street where the company is helping the candidate make an informed decision, or that they're promoting some of the things that might be of interest for the candidate, things like that. So there's the process stuff, but then there's also just the common courtesy stuff, which is easiest to fix as well, in that can you have polite, timely communication from the hiring contacts, the same as you'd expect from the candidates. Are they kind of do they get greeted like in a timely manner, or are they left kind of sitting all kind of nervous and exposed in reception for like 20 minutes like after the interview time? Like, is it had you booked the room, like, or do you have to kick some other people out from accountants like in order to have the interview? Like, I'm probably going on a rant now, because this is my like 20 things that to kind of turn offs in your hiring process stuff, isn't it? But
and we have got a video for that on YouTube if anyone that's interested. Shameless plug.
Is it a clean like room? Is it one of your kind of well-appointed places that showcases the company or not? And the EVP can sit like as a shiny thing in HR, but if your hiring managers are not on the same page, or they're not well trained on how to interview, or they're not rapport building, just likable people, then it cannot translate like into the candidate experience. So do look holistically when you're assessing kind of the impact of your EVP as regards to the recruitment process. And there's some easy fixes, and you do ask for feedback. Like there's candidates who are offered and don't accept all the time, like much to my chagrin these days. And if you ask the why, you'll probably get a lot of answers that are more to do with EVP stuff rather than the actual exact salary.
And just out of interest, how hands-on would you or could you be in terms of reporting back to the companies you deal with bad candidate experience? Do you see that as part of your job to feed that back, or is it a bit awkward?
Both, yeah. It feels like a lot of my job is to be paid to have awkward conversations. But yeah, it's I owe it to clients and candidates to give useful, constructive criticism. So yeah, absolutely, I'd be advising, and it's part of the consultant with a capital C, as we call it in recruitment, that you would be seen as known as a trusted advisor. So if that's you've got spinach in your teeth, I'm afraid I thought I'd be the guy to tell you. And same as with there's lots of people apply, and when they find out that it's you, like half of them back out, and it's on the basis of this and this feedback. So you might want to have a think or address that. Definitely, yeah, it's part of the service, as they say.
James, how often do you come across that candidate experience in your line of work?
Well, a lot with our clients, right? And the one thing we always try and kind of advise clients or advise to their clients is every touch point that someone has with your brand, they have a touch point with your brand and have an experience with your brand. Okay, whether they're buying from you, whether they're using your service, whether they're coming for an interview, right? Everyone is going to come away with some kind of opinion of what that experience was like. So if it's a candidate, I don't understand why you would treat a candidate who's potentially coming, who may not get the job, but become an advocate, of your business. Why you would kind of leave them waiting for 15 minutes and then chuck accounts out of that. Everything you're compounding this potential kind of bad experience again and again and again and again. Someone walks away and they might be a perfect candidate for you, and just go away like, actually the interview went well, but I was sitting there for 20 minutes in a really hot kind of office, and no one even offered to give me a glass of water. All that, just little things, just common courtesies and poor communication, which is usually the main driver for terrible candidate experience, is communication, which doesn't even have to be from a person these days, can all be automated from a bot basically as well, right? Just keeping people in the loop, right? And whether that is when they're on the interview today, or whether it's pre-interview, all of that kind of stuff is the stuff that can really affect candidate experience, because someone can quite easily not get a job, but be told in a very kind of humane and caring and empathetic way that didn't get a job. Here's why, but keep looking, keep going, keep trying. There might be something, in a year's time. we found that you didn't have the right kind of skills. Here's some suggestions around how you could upskill for the next time this kind of role kind of comes up. Just stuff that's just added value to helpful, unless that's not your EVP. And if your EVP is just to be a real, I was going to swear then, sorry, I normally do, right? To your kind of candidates and kind of always put them through this kind of trial, like it's a bush tucker trial or something like that. Then if that's what you want to cultivate, then fine. But you're going to have that. That's your kind of, that's your brand, and you're going to have to deal with that. But yeah, all the little things where someone has a touch point is then potentially a kind of an advocate of your brand. So you have to be kind of meticulous about how those kinds of things, how that kind of all kind of plays out. And
some of those points very easy to be overlooked, aren't they? The points you just mentioned, James.
But it's just common courtesy, a lot of it, though, right? Especially on the day of someone's interview, for instance, it's very simple to kind of just keep people in the loop and just treat them with courtesy and empathy. Also realizing this could be a potentially quite a stressful day for them, right? So putting these kind of people at ease, right, and not just kind of letting them flounder and making them feel like they're on Dragon's Den, which is we've all been in kind of situations like that, right? There's no need to kind of go. And again, unless that's the company culture that you're trying to cultivate, you want it like Dragon's Den, you want it ruthless, then that's the kind of people that you're going to get coming for those interviews then. But even post and pre that, again, it can all be kind of managed pretty easily these days, and I'm sure Anthony does a great job at it. But there are kind of agencies and then clients who don't do very good, and that all goes along to just building a negative employer brand.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, James. We're very quickly running out of time, fellas. So, James, over to you first. Just based on the things we've been speaking about today, if you had to give a tip or a couple of tips to people to help them, improve their brand, employer branding, what would you suggest?
Well, I think it comes back to exactly what it's that communication piece, right? If you want your kind of great candidate experience, right, it is all around communication. It's keeping people in the loop, and it's not difficult to do that in this day and age. Whether it's kind of email, WhatsApp, Slack, wherever else you're kind of communicating with people, you just keep people in the loop so they know exactly what's happening, and they'll come away with a far better experience than if you just they went for an interview and then just nothing hit, then they had to chase you. That's the worst. You don't want to get to a point where people are chasing you, right, in that kind of candidate journey.
Sure. Ant?
Yeah, and if I had to just pick a one or a quick thing, I guess alignment is kind of springing to mind for me. It's like this, yes, there is brand, employer brand, EVP, candidate experience. So talk about that, think about that, get on the same page, about that in your businesses, and make sure that what you are and what you say and what you do, are coming into alignment, and that's in good conjunction with your kind of strategic goals and things like that, and how you want to be portrayed and talked about in the market, because it is an increasingly competitive market for good candidates, and the potential candidates are your customers as well. At the end of the day, your employer brand will affect your brand, and potentially, as debated by James, like vice versa as well. That I think there are a lot of companies that are better than their brand is better than their employer brand, like maybe a Sports Direct or a Weatherspoons and things like that. It took me more of a head scratch to work out which ones kind of their employer brand's better than their brand, and made me think of like people like maybe like Butlins, Timpsons, like could be an example of that as well. They're really known as a really good employer, and ex-offenders and benefits for a level of people who wouldn't normally have benefits and things like that. So yeah, that's separate but related. Sorry for the long answer.
That's good. We've gone even further over time, but that's good. Thanks, folks. It's been really interesting listening to you both talk about that. James, it's been a pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been really great to have you on board. Where can people find you and learn a bit more about ThinkInCircles?
So they can connect with me on LinkedIn, just James Whitelock. Just you'll find me. You can either search for me or for ThinkInCircles, which is as it says along the bottom there. Just Google that or stick it into LinkedIn. You'll probably find us. Also check out the podcast, the Marketing Rules podcast, if you get a chance as well, which we record kind of every few weeks. So go and check it out. I think it's like the 10th most listened to business podcast in Portugal or something like that, So for all our Portuguese fans,
Represent.
Obrigado.
I'm not sure what this is turning into, but thanks, James. You can find out more about Macstaff on the website, obviously, and please check out our YouTube channel where there's all sorts of video content which would be very useful to both clients and candidates. That just leaves me, Martin Crowson, to say thanks a lot to you for joining us today. Anthony, thanks a lot for your time today.
And yeah, thanks, Martin, and thanks very much to James. You're a gent and a scholar. That was fun.
Thank you very much. It's absolute pleasure.
And James, you leave us with the knowledge that you have provided the best mic and headphone setup we've ever had on Macstaff Live. So respect, and we'll no doubt have to have you on if solely for that reason. Again, thanks again.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, folks. All the best, and we'll catch up with you soon here on Macstaff Live. Bye-bye.